Okie dokie. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Praise be unto God, the Lord of the worlds. Here we are in session number 10. There's quite a few people, not a few people today, but that's okay. Before we start, I thought I'd give a heads up about this book here, Creation and the Timeless Order of Things. This is a collection of very timely and very important essays by the late Toshihiko Izutsu. This was published back in 1994 by I think they're now defunct publishing company based in Ashland, Oregon, White Cloud Press. And it's a collection of about 7 essays of Izutsu that is extremely important for this course. I found the PDF of it, and so I uploaded it to the Telegram page. The essays are things like the basic structure of metaphysical thinking in Islam. Then the second one, the paradox of light and darkness and the garden mysteries of Shabestari. The third one, which is very good, and it's one of the longer essays, an analysis of Wahdat al-Wujud. Then the one after that, the fourth one, is mysticism and the linguistic problem of equivocation in the thought of Ain al-Ghuzzat Hamedani. Following that, creation and the timeless order of things, a study in the mystical philosophy of Ain al-Ghuzzat Hamedani. And then the seventh one is the concept of perpetual creation in Islamic mysticism and Zen Buddhism. And the final one is existentialism, East and West. These are very, very good essays. I could not recommend these essays enough. They were published as articles separately during Izutsu's career. And then subsequently, Ashland Press collated and collected them under a single cover and published them. The book is now in hardcover, it's now out of print. But the PDF exists, and I put the PDF up in the Telegram page. And if you can read through at least the first 3 or 4 essays in that collection, if you're struggling with the ideas in the Fusus al-Hikam, this would go a long way to assuage a lot of your the problems that you may have with these ideas. Izutsu is generally fantastic. The first part of his book, Sufism and Taoism, basically deals with Ibn Arabi's Fusus al-Hikam. And one thing that is extremely good about Izutsu is that Izutsu is not a follower of traditions. He always has his own approach to things, and he will say so. And in the very beginning of the preface or the foreword to the Creation and Timeless Order of Things, his student William Chittick actually reminisces about when they studied the Fusus al-Hikam over like a 7-year period with Izutsu, and that Izutsu would give the commentators their due, but he always had his own approach to how to read Ibn Arabi and how to interpret these passages of the Fusus, and he was not shy of saying so. So this course of people, which included people like William Chittick, Ghulam Reza al-Albani, and some of the subsequent big figures in the study of Islamic philosophy, or at least the Wahdat al-Wujudi school of Islamic philosophy in the West, and even in Iran in the last 30, 40 years, were all in one way or another during that period of students of Izutsu's for this particular course. There were also students of Henri Corbin, who was simultaneously teaching at the Iranian Imperial Academy of Philosophy at the time. So that must have been an amazing era. I asked Chittick one time that I met him at Berkeley in 1995 for one of the Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society gatherings, what that was like. And he said it was just like a dream, living a dream, that you had all these great figures like Izutsu, Corbin, Mohaqqaq, and I mean, to some degree, Nasr. Nasr wasn't really teaching at that period. He was acting as the president of the university, as well as working as a secretary to the office of Queen Farah Diba. But these foreign or American and European students who were studying in Tehran at the time had the benefit of Corbin, although Corbin by that point was quite old. But he was still very lucid, and his classes were exceptionally good and packed from what Chittick told me. And also some of the other people that I have met over the years who studied on the Henry Corbin and went to some of these classes, whether in Iran or in the Sorbonne. You know, if you have read a text of Henri Corbin's, he used to teach in exactly the same way and talk in the very, you know, convoluted kind of diction that you find in the text of Henri Corbin. Anyway, this book is excellent. And if you can read through its essays, like one or two, or the first four essays especially, it is really good. I could not recommend these highly enough for anybody. Anyway, let's get cracking into the sixth chapter of the Fusus, which is going to be a one session deal, and this will also be the case with the chapter that we cover next week, which is Ismail. Now, before I start, as everybody's probably wondering, and as the commentators themselves address this issue, why is the story of the sacrifice of Abraham's son being kind of leaned on the Jewish narrative of this rather than the Islamic narrative? Because in the Islamic narrative, that is the Hadith and not the Quran, because the Quran is quite vague as to which of the sons it's referring to in the sacrifice story. But the Hadith literature is very unequivocal on all sides that the son that was to be sacrificed was not Isaac per the biblical and Old Testament narrative, but actually Ismail, the son of Hajar, the maidservant, and the rival of Sarah, Abraham's former wife. But yet here in the Fusus al-Hikam, the Bezels of Wisdom, we find that Ibn Arabi is basically re-articulating the standard Jewish biblical narrative about the identity of the son to be sacrificed. The commentators, at least the first couple of generation commentators, Qonawi, Jandi, Kashani, and Qaisari, go through great pains to explain this reason, but basically all of them are of the same consensus that because this book is a revelatory text, that Ibn Arabi basically claims at the very beginning of this book to be basically putting forth what was dictated to him in the dream. That is the book that was given to him by the Prophet Muhammad. So he is not changing any iota and is not going to even comment or point out any of possible contradictions in formal narratives. And so as far as the text of the Fusus al-Hikam is concerned, in this particular narrative of the story, it is Isaac that is the object of the sacrifice or purported sacrifice, and not Ismail. And this has been a real thorn of contention between the school of Ibn Arabi and both its formal detractors and even some of its supporters, like for example the Shiite commentators and the Shiite followers of the Akbarian school, such as Sayyid Haydar al-Muli, also raised this question. It's like, why is this Isaac? Why is there a leaning on the Judeo-Christian narrative rather than the standard Islamic one that is in the Hadith? Anyway, these are things that should be borne in mind. So let's get cracking into this chapter itself. The wisdom of reality in the word of Isaac. The ransom of a prophet is a beast slaughtered as a sacrificial offering. But how can the bleating of a ram compare with the speech of a man? God the mighty made mighty the ram for our sake or its sake. I know not by what measure. No doubt, other sacrificial beasts fetch a higher price, but they are all less than a ram slaughtered as an offering. Would that I knew how a mere ram came to be a substitute for the vicegerent of the merciful. Do you not perceive a certain logic in the matter? The realization of gains and the diminution of loss. All of the commentators basically point out that what Ibn Arabi means here is that both the sacrificer and the sacrifice represent facets of the essence simultaneously. No creation is higher than the stone, and after it the plant, in a certain sense and according to certain measures. After the plant becomes a sentient being, all know their creator by a direct knowledge and on clear evidence. As for the one called Adam, he is bound by intelligence, thought, and the garland of faith. Concerning this, Sahle Tustari, a Gnostic like ourselves, said, because we and they are have the degree of spiritual vision. Whoso has contemplated what I have contemplated will say the same as I, whether in secret or openly. Do not consider words contrary to ours, nor sow seed in blind soil. For they are the deaf, the dumb, of whom the sinless one spoke in the text of the Quran. And so here we are in the didactic part. No, may God strengthen us and you, that Abraham, the intimate, said to his son, I saw in sleep that I was killing you for sacrifice. The state of sleep is the plane of the imagination, and Abraham did not interpret what he saw, for it was a ram that appeared in the form of Abraham's son in a dream, while Abraham believed what he saw at face value. So his Lord rescued his son from Abraham's misapprehension by the great sacrifice of the ram, which was the true expression of his vision with God, of which Abraham was unaware. The formal self-revelation of the reality on the plane of the imagination requires an additional knowledge by which to apprehend what God intends by a particular form. Have you not considered what the apostle of God said to Abu Bakr concerning the interpretation of visions when he said, I was right in some cases and mistaken in others? Abu Bakr asked him to acquaint him in which of them he had been right and in which wrong, but he did not tell him. God says to Abraham, calling him, O Abraham, you believed what you saw. And he does not say you were right concerning what you saw, namely in seeing your son, because he did not interpret what he saw, but took it at its face value, although visions require interpretation. Thus, Joseph's master says, if you will interpret the vision, interpretation means to pass from the form of what one sees to something beyond it. The word concept used here in the Fusus in the Arabic is motin, which comes from batin. So a place where the inner reality of something abides. In the diction of Ibn Arabi is the motin. We also get the word watan from that, but motin basically means the inner reality of something or the inner domain of something. Thus, were the cattle symbols for years of scarcity and plenty. Had he been true to the vision, he would have killed his son, for he believed that it was his son he saw. Although with God, it was nothing other than the great sacrifice in the form of his son. Because of this, he saved him, because of the mistaken notion that had entered Abraham's mind. In reality, it was not a ransom in God's sight, but the sacrifice itself. The senses formulated the sacrifice, and the imagination produced the form of Abraham's son. Had it been a ram he saw in the imagination, he would have interpreted it as his son or as something else. Then God says, this is indeed a clear test. That is, a test of his knowledge as to whether he knew what interpretation was necessary in the context of vision or not. Abraham knew that the perspective of the imagination required interpretation, but was heedless on this occasion and did not deal with the perspective in the proper way. Thus he believed the vision as he saw it, literally. Taqi ibn al-Mukhallat, the Imam and author of the Musnad, heard that the Apostle had said, whoever sees me in sleep has seen me in waking, for the devil cannot take my form upon himself. Accordingly, Taqi ibn Mukhallat saw him in sleep, and the Prophet was giving him milk to drink. He believed the vision superficially and made himself vomit to prove its truth. Had he penetrated to the meaning of his vision, the milk would have been what it represented, knowledge. But God denied him much knowledge because he had drunk it as milk. Have you not considered that when the Prophet was brought a bowl of milk in a dream, he said of it, I drank of it until I was completely satiated, and the rest I gave to Omar. It was said to him, what is your interpretation, O Apostle of God? he said knowledge, nor did he simply take it as milk according to the form he saw, because of his knowledge of the perspective of vision and the necessity to interpret what he is seeing. It is well known that the form of the prophet perceived by the senses is buried in Medina, and that the spiritual form and subtle essence have never been seen by anyone of anyone, nor yet his own, as is the case with every spirit. The spirit of the prophet appears to one in the form of his body when he died, albeit unaffected by decay. Indeed, it is Muhammad appearing as spirit in a corporeal form resembling the buried body, which form Satan is unable to assume as a protection from God for the recipient of the vision. Thus, whoever sees him in this way accepts from him all he commands or forbids and all he says, as he would accept his precepts in this world according to whether the sense of the words is explicit or implicit, or in whatever sense they are. If, on the other hand, he gives him something, its form, it is a matter of interpretation. If, however, that thing proves the same in the sensory world as in the imagination, the vision is one that does not require interpretation, which is how Abraham the Intimate and Taqi ibn Mukhallat dealt with what they saw. Since then, the vision has these two aspects, and since God has taught us by what he did with Abraham and what he said to him, which teaching is connected to the station of prophecy, as we know, in respect of any vision we may have of the reality in a form unacceptable to the reason, although the word used in the written Arabic is shar, the law, that we must interpret that form in accordance with the doctrinal concept of the reality, either from the standpoint of the recipient of the vision or the cosmic context of the vision, or both. If, however, reason does not reject it, we accept it as we see it, even as we shall see the reality in the hereafter. In every abode of being, becoming the unique, the merciful has forms, whether hidden or manifest. If you say, this is the reality, you have spoken the truth. If something other, you're interpreting. His determination applies in every abode equally. Indeed, he is ever unfolding his reality to creation. When he manifests himself to the sight, reason rushes to bring proof against him. He is accepted as manifested on the intellectual plane, as also in the imagination, but direct vision sees truth. Abu Yazid al-Bastami said with respect to this station, if the throne and all that surrounds it multiplied 100 million times were to be in one of the many corners of the heart of the Gnostic, he would not be aware of it. This was the scope of Abu Yazid in the realm of corporeal forms. I say, however, that where limitless existence, if its limit could be imagined, together with the essence that brought it into existence, to be put into one of the corners of the heart of the Gnostic, he would have no consciousness of it. It is established that the heart encompasses the reality, but though it be filled, it thirsts on, as Abu Yazid says, Halman Yazid. We have alluded to this station as follows. O he who creates things in himself, you comprise all you create. Though you create beings without limit within yourself, you're both the restricted and the all-encompassing. Were all the creation of God in my heart, its brilliant dawn would not shine there. Whoso embraces the reality can contain all creatures. What then is the true station, O hearing one? Every man creates by his fancy in the imaginative faculty that which has existence nowhere else, this being a common facility. The Gnostic, however, by his concentration, creates that which has existence beyond the origin of the concentration. Indeed, the concentration continues to maintain its existence, which depletes it in no way at all. Should the attention of the Gnostic be deflected from the maintenance of what he has created, it will cease to exist, unless the Gnostic commands all planes of existence, in which case such deflection does not arise, since at all times he's present on some plane or another. When the Gnostic who has such a command creates something by his concentration, it is manifest in his form on every plane. In this case, the forms, each on a different plane, maintain each other, so that if the Gnostic is absent on a certain plane or planes, while present on another or others, all the forms on all the planes are manifested by the form on the plane to which his attention is given. Lack of attention is never total, either with the generality of men or the elite. This paragraph is the absolute key to understanding theurgy, how it works, and in whose hands it actually works. This is so key and important that I wish that many people on that list of ours were there to see what Ibn Arabi has to say. And also, this is another one of the reasons of why I chose the specific desert, because of what Ibn Arabi is underlying here. And so then people who wonder why their operations don't work is because they're not understanding the dynamic at work here that Ibn Arabi has put his finger on the nerve on. He goes on. Thus, I have expounded here a mystery that the folk have always guarded from exposition, because it would seem to contradict their claim to being one with the reality. The reality is never unattentive, while the servant is always inattentive to something or other. With respect to the maintenance of something he has created, the Gnostic may say, I am the real, and al-Haq, like Mansur al-Hallaj says. But his maintenance of that thing cannot be compared to the maintenance exercised by the real. The difference between the two we have already explained, since to the extent that he is inattentive to some form on its plane, he is a servant as distinct from the reality. The distinction remains even when we take account of the fact that attention to a single form on a particular plane assures the maintenance of all the other forms, for this is the maintenance by implication. The maintenance by the reality of his creation is of this kind, since he maintains each form himself at all times. This whole question, as I have been told, has never previously been committed to writing, either by me or any other until now. It is indeed unique and without precedent. Take care lest you forget this, for that plane in which you remain present with the form may be compared to the book of which God said, we have missed nothing in the book. The book here does not just mean the physical book. What Ibn Arabi is saying, the book of creation itself, so the whole cosmos. So the book, Kitab here is, in the way that Ibn Arabi is gleaning this, is synonymous with Kawn, the universe. For it comprises all that has come to pass into being and all that has not come to pass. Only he will truly know what we have said, whose essential self is united in totality, or is conjuncted, or on. Here he is, he's using that word, the word Quran again in his unconventional sense. For the one who fears God, he will make a discrimination for him. And he is, as we have mentioned in discussing the distinction between the Lord and the servant. This discrimination, this particular form of Furqan, so now he's saying the opposite, he's giving an opposite definition to what he said in the chapter of Noah. This discrimination is the loftiest discrimination. So this kind of Furqan is an actually important form of Quran that a true Gnostic possesses. And then the concluding poem of this chapter, at the time the servant is a lord, without a doubt. At the time the servant is a servant, most certainly. If servant, he encompasses the reality. If lord, he is in a lowly state. As servant, he perceives the essential self, and hopes range widely from him. As Lord, he sees all creation, both lower and higher, making demands on him. In himself, he is quite unable to answer the demands. And for this reason, you may see Gnostics weeping. So be the servant of a lord, not the lord of a servant, lest you fall into hellfire. And that was the chapter of Isaac. This is a very good chapter. There's not that much attention usually to this chapter, but he introduces the imagination and its role, and how the creative process within the imagination happens. And it is that paragraph I read you is so apropos for any practicing magis and anyone who calls themselves a theurgist, that I don't understand that how people can practice Islamic theurgy without recourse to Ibn Arabi, and especially this particular chapter of it, because here he's basically laying out the theory of how magic actually works and in whose hands magic actually works. You know, the maintenance of the order. You know, somebody has a desire, a wish, some outcome that they want to bring into being. The theosophy of Ibn Arabi, and to some extent even what Al-Buni himself says at the very commencement of his Shams al-Ma'arif, the role of the khiyal, the role of the active imagination in making theurgy work is the central key to all of it. So it's not just even the amal and that sort of thing. It is the various causalities and effects and the various synthesis that occur between the practitioner and the content of their practice that becomes the dynamic that makes the magic, the theurgy, manifest into the world. So when people are asking the questions, well, why don't my operations work? Is because they're not there. There's a very big central component of the praxis of magic that they're missing. So then what does that tell us about in whose hand does magic work? And Ibn Arabi is saying this from the very beginning. It is in the hands of the Gnostic. Okay? And he said this in the previous chapter, as well as to some extent in this chapter, is that the himma, you know, the intentionality, which I usually translate that word as intentionality. The intentionality, the himma of a given Gnostic is a creative thing as compared to other people, right? So when he goes to, and he puts his finger on maintenance of the order, right? We have to then read back what he has been defining in the last two chapters as being himma, the intentionality, right? So a Gnostic or a practitioner or theurgist who has the ability to maintain this concentration upon an object, whether within the actual moment of their practice or conjuration, while simultaneously outside of it, has the capacity to bring what is in the imagination. And by imagination, we're talking about reality. We're not talking about fantasy. Has the capacity to bring this into actualization, right? Which in essence also implicitly tells us that a real theurgist is not bound to the formulas of the books, right? Or even, they're not even bound necessarily to the course of the movement of the stars or seasons, the lunar mansions, and that sort of thing, right? This is also implied to some extent, although he never says it this overtly, within Buni himself. So in essence, the magical praxis of the texts, right, is basically, for lack of a better way of putting it, it is just a placeholder. They're formulas. It's like an atlas, right? You know, within an atlas, I don't, if you guys remember back in the day, used to have these, in America especially, they used to publish yearly, every city around America used to have these things called the Thomas Guide. There were these massive tomes of books where they would, you know, put out the maps of every city and the streets, and then what was on the way. Since the digitization of things, and you know, the arrival of the GPS, I think the company that used to publish these went out of business, but it was such a helpful thing. And everybody would go out and buy them. You could buy them at your local supermarket. So if you ever traveled within a city or traveled outside of your city, you had this book in your car, and you knew what, you know, what sites and what restaurants and what gas stations and that sort of thing would be on the way. So in essence, these textbooks on the occult are very much like a Thomas Guide. So, but you know, you are not bound by, you know, the scenery on the way to your destination, like a Thomas Guide laid out. If you want a certain outcome, right, it is more the inner intentionality. It is the himma that is the magnetic agent of the production of what you want to bring into fruition, and not what the texts are formalizing as getting from A to Z. And this is why I chose this text, because Ibn Arabi is just laying this all out. So what does this mean? This means that those who see their magic, those who see their theurgy working more and more, is because they have a spiritual practice, and because they're practicing outside of the immediate context of a desire or wish or that sort of thing. And this obviously comes with a whole ethical, kind of, larger point of view and worldview in general that then makes these things, these productions of the mind, actualizations in the world. So this, in a sense, is even beyond the sort of stuff that you hear in the New Age market about, manifesting or manifestation. I mean, they're kind of a third. They've got a third of the axiom correct, but they don't, kind of glean the rest of it. Is that, in order for theurgy to work, you must be grounded in a tradition that you're daily practicing, that your entire life is around wayfaring towards God. And so these productions that are produced as a result of an operation, whether you do it in a formalized way or unformalized way, are kind of elements that kind of manifest within your spiritual practice, right? So this in a sense, what we have been witnessing over the last couple of years on that list is kind of a kind of a projection of the times and the culture that we're living in, that is wanting immediate results, that thinks that he can even barter with God about particularities in his life and that sort of thing. Whereas what Ibn Arabi is showing, even when he's showing us the actual formula, the core, the heart of why theurgy can work, he's also simultaneously rubricizing it under the greater context of a spiritual path. So this is something, I mean, this crew of people, I think you guys should take away with you and really internalize for your own magical practice, if you have one. Because I have found what Ibn Arabi is saying to be far more powerful and immediate than Booney or hundreds of other of these occult texts that I've read over the years and poured over, that, even when you practice, sometimes it may work, sometimes it doesn't work. So the attitude and the himma, the intentionality that Ibn Arabi is putting his finger on is everything here. And without it, people are basically wasting their time in the occult world. I'll now open the floor to the rest of you guys. Whoever has the first intuition, question, whatever. Hussein?
I'm a little sick. I'd say come back to me.
Okay. Anyone else?
Sidi, can you explain a little more the conception of himma, which, for example, in another place is translated as a spiritual energy or something like that. It is something which only the high-level Gnostics they have in themselves, or it is something that every one of us have in some level.
All right. The way I mean, I don't like that word energy because of the way that the New Age has completely abused this concept, that they don't even understand what energeia even means in its original Greek. So I choose the term spiritual intentionality. I think this is a little bit more precise kind of definition for in translation for himma. Everybody potentially has the substance of what develops into himma. The himma and the fitra are part of the same thing, right? In essence, the himma is the fitra in animation. So whoever has attained and come back to themselves in their fitri state, in their ein thought, that's the way Ibn Arabi puts it, now is in possession of a fully conscious spiritual intentionality. Right? And you read this, for example, in the many stories of the saints and the Sufi lives of saints, where all kinds of miracles are attributed to these various Sufi masters. And all of these things are a product of that himma that Ibn Arabi is talking about, that spiritual intentionality that has the capability, and I've seen this stuff with my own eyes, that with that spiritual intentionality, you are capable of arresting the laws of physics itself. Not all the time, but it is possible. And it is done very often. So that is what it is. It is latent. Everybody potentially possesses this, but those who get to it are the ones who have traversed the path, who have, whether through the path of riyada, through asceticism, or whether through something similar to that. As long as there is a screen and there's a veil and the limit of veils, that is still, emerging like a plant from its potentiality into its actuality. But once you attain to some level of awakening, that himma is fully flowered. And then all it does from that point forward, it just grows and grows and grows and grows. And the reason for this is just as we read in that very famous Hadith al-Nawafil, right? Where God says, I do not cease from drawing my servant nigh unto me until I become the hand by which he takes, the eyes by which he sees, the ear by which he hears. So what the himma becomes in actuality is that. Because at that point, the Gnostic is becomes so more and more God absorbed, right? That it is not the case that you're dealing with someone's individuated himma in the sense that, this himma belongs to Hassan, this other himma belongs to Hossein or to Jeff or to Stephen, etc. That God absorption that has brought the Gnostic to their fitra now is basically God acting through that particular person as their vehicle, so that person themselves in essence becomes an embodied tajalli, an embodied theophany. That is what that means. But to realize that requires a spiritual path. It requires, and to some degree and level of following this path consistently through all of its pitfalls and heartbreaks and difficulties and all of that sort of thing.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
So, whenever I hear this story of the sacrifice of Abraham that Abraham made, whether it's of Isaac or Ismail, I always think of Kierkegaard, Fear and
Yes.
Trembling, where this whole sacrifice in terms of turning towards God, maybe it's just because of who he was as a person, but it was very fraught with anxiety and doubt. And there's dimensions of it that I haven't really read in this book. I mean, it's implied, certainly. And I was just wondering, in actualizing, or I want to say actualizing, but I suppose in the context of this himma, how idiosyncratic is it?
Let
that
me-
was just what I was
Let me
wondering.
answer it from this perspective, because this has been on my mind the last couple of days when dealing with this chapter. You see throughout all of these chapters leading up to the chapter of Isaac, and you will see it a little bit more in different ways articulated by Ibn Arabi in the subsequent chapters, that even though we're dealing with the Insan Kamil, right, from Adam to Muhammad, until we get to the chapter of Muhammad, Ibn Arabi seems to have a little bit of a criticism of these narratives, and at least the roles of the prophets in these narratives, as if they're lacking something throughout this entire. There's something that they keep missing, whether with Noah, that he didn't understand that by overemphasizing the transcendence, he lost his audience, and so that was forced to curse them into the deluge. Or whether we come to Abraham and he misinterpreted the vision that God sent to him. Or even with Adam himself, that, even though that Adam is the Ahsan al-Makhluk, and in the end, him and Eve made a boo-boo when God told them not to eat from the tree, and they did, and they got expelled out of the garden. All of this is very present. Now, I take you back to the Surah Al-Kahf, And this is a very important point, and I've not seen any of the commentators put their finger on this. But given that one of Ibn Arabi's foremost teachers, super sensible teachers, was Khidr, and since we know what the story of Moses and Khidr is in the Surah Al-Kahf, this refrain is constant throughout the Fusus al-Hikam all the way to the final chapter. That these prophets, as great as they were, as insan kamils as they were, because of their own veils, were not complete. And so they missed the forest for the trees, just as Moses did when he kept, pestering Khidr to explain to him why he was doing these crazy things until the last moment. And so this is all present. What Ibn Arabi is trying to point out, however, which is very important, is, on the one hand, you can take this as saying that Ibn Arabi is kind of implying that the vision of the Gnostics is higher than the prophets. Yes and no, he is saying that. But just remember, Khidr himself is already also a prophet. He's not just a saint. So it's not the case that he's making this kind of oppositional binary and juxtaposition between the prophets and the Awliya. What he's saying is that the Gnostic here, with the prophet standing for a developing Gnostic, has to be on their toes all the time and has to constantly expand their knowledge of things, right? Constantly, and not take a damn thing for granted ever, right? Even if they attain the position of having a very strong himma, or as he says at the end of this chapter, a very strong furqan, the ability to distinguish right and wrong and all that sort of thing. You cannot take a damn thing for granted ever on this path, however high you go in it. And this is why Ibn Arabi, in my opinion, is such an important perspective in this particular time, because he, not just from the moral perspective of the humility, but from a very practical perspective, where you have these gurus coming out and claiming to be enlightened Buddhas or, God realized and that sort of thing. And then sometime later they form these organizations. And then sometime after that, these organizations fall apart, with all kinds of scandals and abuse and all that sort of thing coming out of it. And this is what Ibn Arabi has put his finger on the nerve of throughout this chapter and throughout the other chapters of the Fusus, is that a given master, a given Gnostic, no matter how far they go, no matter how many disciples they attract to themselves and how much acclaim they give, you cannot take it for granted. Number one, even if you come to the point where you are having the absolute unific vision and you say an al-Haq, yet you are an embodied vehicle and you cannot maintain, like God does, the totality of existence, such that if someone comes and is pleading with you to change their life or do this or that for them or save the world, and you're incapable of doing it, even though you're having this vision of the ultimate reality, this is what he means, that then certain Gnostics fall into weeping, because even though they know they are God, they cannot act as in the same way as the ultimate reality can act, right? And this is just perfect what Ibn Arabi is saying, because it now then begins to humanize the sapience, the wisdom that is embodied in the various Gnostics, teachers, prophets, etc., right? So that these people are not indiscriminately placed on a pedestal and worshipped like idols, like many people always do, end up doing anyway. So it's also a warning to the elite themselves to be on your guard, never stop developing yourself. Don't be a dumbass like Moses was with Khidr, right? If you are a high master and you come across a disheveled Shams of Tabriz like Maulana did, don't look at that disheveled Qalandar as the mirror of God to you, no matter how far you think you have gone in your own path. Because God, with the All High, you cannot take anything for granted at any time. Even if you are the ultimate realized Gnostic and a prophet, of the age, a legislating prophet like Moses was, right? So then this now, in a sense, in a secondary sort of way, would tend to give us information about the nature of the himma itself, the spiritual intentionality, right? And this is why the prayer of the prophet, Allahumma arina haqa'iq al-ashya kama hiya. Oh God, show us the realities of things as they truly are, should be a given Gnostic's constant prayer in every circumstance that they find themselves. To never even take their own knowledge for granted, or even not even take their own unveiling for granted. And this is what Ibn Arabi is trying to put his finger on when he instances Abu Yazid Bastami, where Abu Yazid Bastami says that if the whole of the reality were to be contained in the heart of the Gnostic would not even feel it. And there's a reason for that, because if the Gnostic was satiated, he has reached a limit to his realization. Whereas if you do not feel even a speck of the reality within your heart as a Gnostic, that means that you're on solid ground, that you're still moving and expanding forever and ever, and that these expansions into the depths are not going to end for you. This is a very good thing. You know, God, I mean, you should be worried if you can feel that, because that means that's it. You know, no more for you. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does actually. Thank you.
Okay.
In a way that I wasn't expecting, but amazing. Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else? Jeff?
No, I don't have any questions, but that was a little surprising, that last thing you said about feeling versus not feeling. And I'm still, you got my wheels turning there,
Yeah.
because I feel a lot, and too much actually. So it might be the end of the line for me. So, yeah, I'm weeping regularly.
Well, that's a good thing. I mean, tears are great. Tears are purification. Tears are you know, always what it's called for, if they're
Yeah.
sincere, especially.
Yeah.
Yeah, tears are the best.
Yeah. Yeah, there's it sort of has a way of purifying whatever nonsense might be going on in your head. A good cry definitely cleans
yeah.
that all out, doesn't it?
That's why I think women in many respects are very superior to men, because they can deal with their emotional world in a lot better cathartic way, whereas men just bottle it up until they go boom. You know, or pick up a gun and go to a postal office or something.
Yeah. So do you think that a person ever reaches a point where that kind of emotion ceases for them? Because that's hard to imagine.
Well, ceases in a particular manifestation of it, you know, because the theophanies, the self-disclosures are constant. So
Yeah.
the way that is explained in the commentaries is that, you know, each moment there's a theophany happening, and every theophany establishes the appearance of the next one in the heart of the Gnostic, right?
Mhm.
So that whatever a Gnostic is feeling, right, is only just the substrate for the subsequent feeling that's going to come. And on it goes, all of which are theophanies.
Right. Okay. Good answer. Thank you.
Anybody else? Muhammad, go ahead. Muhammad Rahal, you had a question. You're free to talk. Okay, you can't use that. Will be right. Okay. He says, I read that the Himma is also imaged by Sufis. I can't see the rest of your question for some reason.
I can read it aloud for you if you'd like.
Yeah, can you do that?
Okay, so Muhammad says you can't use the mic, so he'll be reading. He says, I read that the Himma is also imagined by the Sufis as a bird, which brought to mind the Egyptian idea of Ba, the bird, as a symbol of the soul. Are these related?
Yes, Ba is also the bird is also Heka, which is magic, is also symbolized by a bird. So absolutely, yeah, definitely can be symbolized that way. There's a lot of this in the imagery of Sufi text. You find this in the Persian Sufis like Attar, but even within the Arab and Arabic Sufi poetry like Ibn Farid, the image Avery, and birds and that sort of thing, as imaging the himma of the saints and that sort of thing is very much there. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Okay. Right. That answers the question. Anyone else? No?
Sidi, can
Sure.
you shed little more light when Sheikh Muhyiddin, the levels which he's explaining that the most simple case when the Gnostic creates by his himma something on one hadra, on one level, as long as he's concentrated that he has created, it exists. But at the moment he strips out of his concentration, it ceases to exist. And then he proceeds and says, but there are, let's say, higher level Gnostics, which are on on all the planes, hadarat of existence. And when they create something, even it strips out of their mind on some levels of existence, but they are concentrated at least on one level. It continues to exist. What does it
Good
mean?
question. That's a good question. A Gnostic who's God absorbed, number one, is human and God at the same time, and they're very aware of that, right? So they oscillate between their humanity and their divinity, whereas God can never oscillate. The real is always the real, and the real is always awake, and the real is always concentrated, but the human is not, right? But at that level of God absorption, when a Gnostic goes out to produce something into the world, because of their God absorption, that reality that they produced has an abiding, produces a kind of a fixed reality, a strong one, right? That even if their attention were to withdraw from it, it would still exist. And that is for a very important reason, because at that level of God absorption, it is not the Gnostic who is producing this. It is God who is producing this. With the Gnostic merely being that vehicle, a kind of the intermediate, the third entity that Ibn Arabi talks about. Okay? Whereas those who have not reached that level of God absorption here, and their attention gets kind of oscillates wildly between being able to have that God absorbed attention and not completely. So they oscillate between the spirit and matter without being able to completely unite the two as one in their consciousness. They cannot maintain with their mind and with their reality, with their fuad. They cannot maintain that thing that they're producing. So if their attention withdraws from it, that thing ceases to have reality altogether. Whereas with the God-absorbed individual, it's not even because it's not even because of their own attained level, it's because they have gone so far into God that it is God really producing what it is. And so that attention, that production remains, because that production then becomes at the level of the the universal cone, the universal beat to something. But just remember, going back to the previous discussion in the metaphysics that Ibn Arabi has kind of already laid out, all these various productions are occurring at the level of the phase al-Muqaddas, at the level of the volition of God. Because the will is the universal and the volition is the kind of the particularizing agency of its actualization. But with those very high God-absorbed Gnostics, they start to penetrate into the divine, into the level of the divine will itself. So then therefore their bodies and their individuations and their individualities are just shells. It's just God. It's the real in totality that is just inhabiting and abiding in those people. And with their full awareness of the fact. But since, humanity is created for this particular experience of duality and multiplicity, the question that I have that Ibn Arabi answers elsewhere very, very beautifully in his Futuhat al-Makkiyah, the multiplicity and the experience of the multiplicity holds a very profound universal necessity. We have to go through this experience because this particular experience of being fallen is part of the experience of the hidden treasure knowing itself, right? Because every form of manifestation must occur. Whereas, those, even amongst the Sufis, for example, who hate the world and start to become like the Gnostics of antiquity, they're missing the forest for the trees. All of this, the dualism itself, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything is part of the hidden treasure. Everything, every element. It's one, but it's one with articulations, right? And this is what Toshihiko Izutsu very simply and beautifully explains in the very first essays of the creation and autonomous order of things, that we're not talking about monism and pantheism as some kind of a monochromatic thing. This is absolute unity with articulations. And so to even talk about even dualism or monism, it kind of misses what is really going on. But even still, all of this is necessary. So a Gnostic, a true Gnostic of the caliber of someone like Ibn Arabi, for example, fully embraces every element of the illusion of material existence as being a theophany in itself. And in my opinion, this kind of perspective is far more powerful than those who want to deny the world, retreat from the world, go sit in the cave and just contemplate the Godhead. In fact, Ibn Arabi very severely criticizes some of these people in his Futuhat al-Makkiyah and says these people are not complete because their arc is not complete. The arc comes back to the multiplicity again. The only difference now is that whereas when you began the arc, you were not aware of the infusion of the wahda and the tawheed within creation, now you've come back, back again, and you're fully aware of the fact, you see all the multiplicities, both in their individualities, but also as being articulations of the one itself. And this is a much more superior way of looking at the world and being in the world than those who just want to go and just be blown out into some state of satori. You find this also in Zen Buddhism where, the master said, at the beginning of the path, a mountain is the mountain. In the middle of the path, the mountain ceases to be the mountain. At the end of the path, the mountain becomes the mountain again. Such that where you end the path is where you began it. The arc of ascent and descent. Perfect circle. Yeah, it does sound a little bit, and this is why I've been saying on if you've been reading some of the stuff I've been putting on Reddit recently, al-Ahsai, Sheikh Ahmed al-Ahsai and Ibn Arabi, despite all the name calling that Ahsai engages against Ibn Arabi, at the end of the day, if you read the text carefully, other than issues of emphasis, there really is no difference between the larger metaphysical framework of Shaykhism and that of the Akbarian school. And that I pointed out that, you know, Sheikh Ahmed al-Ahsai's student Sayyid Kazim al-Rashid had a far more salutary approach to Ibn Arabi than his own Sheikh did. Al-Ahsai was quite bigoted, and I think a lot of his bigotry was, as Sajjad Rezvi once put it, you know, the anxiety of influence. So, you know, I no longer engage in this sort of polemic that some of the even contemporary sheikhs engage in, you know, with the school of Ibn Arabi, because I think these two perspectives from the pure metaphysical perspective are really talking about the same thing. It's just a matter of emphasis, you know, which whole of the emphasis and language you want to put on a particular issue. But yeah, that final poem is very much, you know, what Sheikh Ahmed al-Ahsai says in his Fawaid al-Hikmiyah about the difference between existence and essence. Existence looks upon its Lord, and essence looks upon itself. That's the perspective that's the ontological perspective of Sheikh Ahmad in his, you know, Fawaid al-Hikmiyah. So that's a good point that Muhammad just raised. Anyone else?
Could you explain that? What did you say? Anxiety of influence?
Influence, yeah.
Can you say 2 words about that? Because
Well,
I'm not sure I understand.
The Sheikhi school, Sheikh Ahmed al-Ahsai, basically cut his teeth by being a critic of Ibn Arabi and Mullah Sadra. But when one enters the texts themselves, and particularly his 2 commentaries on Mullah Sadra, the commentary on Mullah Sadra's Wisdom of the Throne, and the commentary on Mullah Sadra's Mashair, the metaphysical penetrations, when you read Sheikh Ahmed Ahsai carefully in his critique of Mullah Sadra, the critique is a case of the lady protesting too much. Because Sheikh Ahmed goes in certain places and criticizes Mullah Sadra for certain positions that he claims that he himself, Sheikh Ahmed, is presenting, but he's just re-articulating Mullah Sadra in a different way. And when you return to his other smaller texts that are contained in these massive volumes of the Jawami al-Kalim, his complete writings, in the few places that he does criticize Ibn Arabi and name calls Ibn Arabi and calls him Mumitaddin, you realize that there's no content to the criticism. So what exactly are you criticizing? And when he criticizes Wahdat al-Wujud, he's criticizing the Wahdat al-Wujud of Ibn Arabi's commentators rather than Ibn Arabi himself. So I have wondered for a very long time, at least in the last 10 years, you know, whether Sheikh Ahmed al-Ahsai had actually even read Ibn Arabi with any degree of precision. He did it with Mullah Sadra, but even in his readings of Mullah Sadra, I think he got it wrong in a lot of places about Mullah Sadra. And you see this in various places, because certain things that Sheikh Ahmed al-Ahsai himself says are either re-articulations of what Mullah Sadra has already said, or augmentations of things that Mullah Sadra has said. So then the question becomes, what is the criticism about? If you are doing this, then you're not really criticizing, you're basically part of the same stream. So I mean, I mentioned on that board on the Bayan subreddit that, you know, I'd accumulated a massive amount of notes on this question. And this was during the last decade, where there was one point, right after I finished reading all 110 volumes of the Bihar al-Anwar, I sat down and read all of the Jawami al-Kalam, all of the volumes of the Jawami al-Kalam, together with the Sultan Mansub edition, the 13 volume edition of the Futuhat al-Makkiyah that was put out in the zeros. And one day I would read the Jawami al-Kalam, and the next day I would go and read Ibn Arabi's Futuhat al-Makkiyah, and I would compile notes and that sort of thing. And my electronic notes just ballooned into a couple of thousand pages, about 4,000 or 5,000 pages all up. And I came away from that experience. This was around like 2015, 2016. It's like, you know, what is the argument? What is the debate about? This Sheikh Ahmed al-Ahsai is saying almost identically the same thing as Ibn Arabi. He's just articulating it with a more Shia, 12-verse Shia language than Ibn Arabi is. And where, you know, ostensibly certain perspectives might be different, they're just a matter of emphasis and not really substantial differences from a greater metaphysical framework. So, I mean, there used to be this academic Shia studies list on Facebook back about a decade ago. It's no longer around. It was called Shia Studies, and it was I think the list owner was Ahab Badawi, and we got into a couple of really good discussions about the Sheikhi school. And Sajjad Rezvi said it back then that in his opinion, when all is said and done, this is the case, and that what Sheikh Ahmed al-Ahsai is basically reacting to is an anxiety of influence, because he doesn't want to be seen as having been influenced by the school of Ibn Arabi. But in actuality, he was. And there's even a very concrete, tangible evidence for this, is that Sheikh Ahmed al-Ahsai is claimed to have inherited the library of Ibn Abi Jumhur al-Ahsai, a fellow Bahraini from about 250 years before him. And this was a 12er Shiite Akbarian. Some have called him also a crypto-Ismaili. Ibn Abi Jumhur, he was the author of the La'ali wal-Majali and the Kitab al-Mujli. And likewise, the most eminent near contemporary of Ibn Abi Jumhur was Rajab Bursi, the author of the Masharik al-Anwar, where Bursi compiled all these very wild theopathic hadith of the Imams and analyzed them, like the text of the Khutbah Tatanjiyah, the sermon between the two gulfs that we have today, comes from the recension by Rajab Bursi in his Masharik al-Anwar. So these issues are there. I mean, Sheikh Ahmad is obviously influenced by the Akbarian, the Shiite Akbarian approach, but yet when it comes to himself, he waxes indignant and critical and name calls and that sort of thing. And in my opinion, this is all very unproductive. And as brilliant, and he was brilliant as Sheikh Ahmed al-Ahsai was, this is a blight. And I think for any future scholar who wants to dip their feet into a very fruitful area of research is to look at this and come up with a dissertation, because this antipathy between the two schools of the Sheikhia and the Akbarians and the Hawza has produced a lot of negative side effects in the greater Shia society of Iran and Iraq, and doesn't need to be that way, at all. So I don't have the time to do it myself, but I've accumulated all these notes, and I'm, like I said, if anybody wants to ever delve into a research topics around this, I'm happy to hand it over to them, no problem at all. Anybody else?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, well, that was the chapter of Isaac.
Just one
Sure.
more question, Sayyidi.
Sure.
So, if you should extract from this chapter the main principle or the main conclusions about practical dream interpretation, in what words you would put?
Good question. Is that one has to taste a given dream that one has and the contents of that dream as to whether one is to literally interpret a given image or symbol that appears in it, whether that symbol or image is actually indicating a moten, as Ibn Arabi is talking about, a inner domain. With this inner domain, and then once that is understood correctly, then you penetrate into that inner domain in order to glean out what that metaphor for it is supposed to be. This is what Abraham didn't do. So, he saw his son, he said, "Oh, God is commanding me to kill my son." That was not God's intention whatsoever, as Ibn Arabi is rightfully saying. This interpretation by Ibn Arabi, it doesn't matter whether it's Isaac or Ismail or whatever, is probably the most unique and the most humane and most sensible and logical interpretation of this story that we have ever had, whether from the Jewish side or from the Islamic side, as far as I'm concerned. So, and it teaches exactly that very thing, is to be very attentive to how a dream manifests. So if there is ambiguity in a given trajectory of a dream or a vision, then you know that it is trying to indicate something beyond that immediate symbol. If there's no ambiguity, then it's pretty obvious, okay, that's what it means. But if there's ambiguity at any point, as there was ambiguity in Abraham's dream, then it is incumbent for you to try to find out whether that symbol is actually trying to indicate something else. It's acting as a metaphor rather than as a strict literal symbol of itself. That is one of the big takeaways from this chapter.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Okay, so start the chapter of Ismail. This is going to be our chapter 7. This is also a short chapter. We're going to deal with this in one section as well. The dhikr associated with this one is Ya Ali, oh hi. And until next week, where we will delve into this chapter, everybody have a good week. Ya Haq.